safe bet to say that The Last of Us Part 2 might be the most controversial game to ever release. Its nuanced but provocative writing, paired with an extremely unconventional narrative structure, meant that from the very beginning, there was always going to be a subset of people that just didn't like it, which is a far cry from the reception of the first game, something that was almost universally celebrated for its characters, a hint of hope in an otherwise disheartening and desolate world. When Season 1 of HBO's The Last of Us launched back in 2023, the general consensus seemed to be quite positive, with critics noting it as incredibly faithful to the original, almost to a fault at times. There were some changes, like Episode 3, Long Time, which did substantially change elements of the original's plot in service of the television format, but did so in a way that genuinely fleshed out some of the game's characters in its otherwise oppressively bleak setting. While most would argue that Season 1, despite some issues, at least allowed more people to experience the story of The Last of Us, something so beloved by practically anyone that enjoys video games as an art form, and that its existence, despite some minor issues here and there in regards to characterization, was broadly a net positive due to that inherent accessibility that comes along with the medium of TV. And yeah, the show performed incredibly well, with 8.2 million people tuning in for its final episode, a number I'm sure has only grown with time. So, the elephant in the room. The big fucking thing in the corner with the 2 at the end of it. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I think that Season 2 of the show is absolutely dreadful. And for one time in the history of The Last of Us Part 2 discourse, that's probably something that both sides, those that loved the game and those that hated the game, will agree on. And just so we're on the same page, I'm a big fan of Part 2. But if it didn't work for you, I promise I'm not here to convince you of otherwise. The Last of Us Season 2 has this incessant desire to explain everything, really exemplifying a tell, don't show attitude, utterly devoid of any and all nuance. You might even say that it insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
It insists upon itself.
What does that even mean?
It has glaring issues with its characterization of not just Ellie, but almost every character, and its deep-rooted structural issues, fundamentally degrading a narrative that structure is its defining characteristic. In this video, I want to explore the ways that the show fails to capture the essence of the game and how it ultimately flounders as an adaptation, because HBO doesn't understand The Last of Us Part 2. Ellie was reintroduced to us back in 2020 a little differently to the character we knew, still possessing traits similar to the first game, a quick-witted, smart-mouthed teenager, but a clearly much more experienced person 5 years into the future. She's had the benefit of relative safety in Jackson, allowing her to live a comparatively normal life despite the CBI posing a major threat. The sudden and unexpected death of Joel truly shakes her, leaving her ridden with guilt and anger, and it's in this that we follow her to Seattle in search of vengeance. We are right there with her on this journey, with a desire to see the people that did this, especially Abby, the one responsible, brought to justice. It's over the course of the game that we start to see Ellie change. While she's still a clearly intelligent character who is fiercely protective of those close to her, much like Joel was, as she and Dina make their way through Seattle, systematically finding and dealing with the crew, you can see that the lengths that she's willing to go to starts to shift. While the game does a great job of getting you into the mindset of Ellie, Joel's death came so brutally and so unexpectedly that it's almost a guarantee for you to be riled up enough to see her journey through to the end. Eventually, Ellie's metamorphosis into a monster is inescapable. This bloodlust that she has, mowing down dozens of people on this desperate path of vengeance, you're expected to be thrown off a little as she slowly becomes something almost unrecognizable from the Ellie you know. And that is entirely the point. You'll empathize with her plight, but you're supposed to feel disenfranchised, disconnected from her actions, but conflicted because it's Ellie. You know her because Abby killed Joel. Mr. The Last of Us, you still want justice as much as she does. Ellie becomes cruel in a way that's designed to make you uncomfortable, and as she strays into depravity, you're gonna start questioning her. This style of writing was always going to be somewhat controversial. It's complex, and it's risky, and it really worked for me, but I think there are generally two other camps when it comes to their engagement with Ellie's story. Look, Joel's death is designed to piss you off. It feels so brutal, so barbaric, and some people were so caught up in that emotion, fair enough by the way, that they were willing to look past any of Ellie's wrongdoing, as their desire to see Abby brought to justice was on par with hers in almost every way. And if you fully bought into the idea that Joel was wrong in his decision to take Ellie from the Fireflies, you might have felt that Ellie's quest for revenge was somewhat unjustified, especially when it was revealed that she was aware of exactly what Joel did and traveled to Seattle anyway. While I don't necessarily agree with these characterizations of the events in the game's first act, I definitely understand them as a sticking point for many people, and they are both things that Craig Mazin attempted to address in the adaptation. Here's the thing though, these events are complicated, tackling complex character motivations on every side. Many of those motivations are only implied, left up to you to determine through your own lens, and that was a lot of the appeal of Part 2. It felt like it was asking a lot of you to really try and understand what it was attempting to tell you, and for a lot of people, they just couldn't meet it where it was, and that's not a fault of them. As I said, it's a risky play, so for the showrunners to come in and try to remedy these issues might not initially seem like a bad thing. In favor of adapting a story into something that more people might be able to enjoy, instead of a deft touch, any and all nuance has been stripped from the character writing and the events at play, and that is no more obvious than in the show's very first scene. We see Abby and the Jackson crew standing around a group of graves next to the hospital from the end of season 1, and they outright state in the very first scene, "We are going to find Joel and torture him to death because of what he did." Despite being incredibly on the nose, this is a massive departure from how the game plays out. We do see Abby and her crew early on in the game, yet we have no idea what their motivations are until the event itself is taking place. It's supposed to be a major shock, yet for some reason, the show just outright tells you exactly what's going to happen for some reason. Abby is painted as entirely sympathetic. The show is so scared of presenting her in a way that's unlikable, and in that, it has to give you every reason to try and understand where she's coming from. For the story to work, you have to think of Abby and her crew as utterly irredeemable at this point because it gives you a drive on par with Ellie's. You're supposed to hate them purely because of what they did, but the show is not at all interested in this line of reasoning, which is super weird because that is a fundamental pillar of this narrative. Their motive in the game was a topic of mystery, never outright stated until Ellie had systematically murdered every single member of the crew before a tense confrontation between her and Abby in the theater. This lack of information is almost fundamental to the story, as it both strengthens your desire for justice, but also aids in your curiosity in finding out exactly why they did what they did. The show immediately removes all ambiguity, with Abby going as far as fully monologuing her motivations to Joel before she beats him to death, with Joel quite hilariously saying, shut the fuck up and do it already when she whinges for almost 10 straight minutes. This monologue is a massive effort on Mazin to make Abby more sympathetic to viewers, which again just harms the plot. It's just worse, and I'm absolutely dumbfounded as to why they thought this was the right way to go about it. Now, to Ellie. Her characterization is almost entirely different than that of the game, to the point where she may as well have been a completely different character. Part 2 had the benefit of a whole game's worth of character development prior. We got to see Ellie grow and change as she and Joel trekked across the United States in search of the Fireflies, and it worked to not just develop Ellie as a compelling character, but to allow the audience to connect with her on a personal level, and to see the changes within her when Part 2 jumped 5 years forward. Those changes are important, they're meaningful, and they make up a significant portion of Ellie's being, growing from the clearly intelligent yet hot-headed teenager that we knew from the first game into someone a lot more confident, a capable member of a functioning society in Jackson. I think the showrunners probably felt like the tone of The Last of Us Part 2 might have been a little too bleak at times, and in doing that, drastically altered how Ellie behaves, almost making her some sort of comic relief, feeling like Dina's sidekick almost. Dina is the intelligent one here, tracking down the members of the WLF, whilst Ellie bumbles around like an idiot, cracking one-liners and even being directly called out for being stupid by multiple characters. It almost feels like a Marvel film at times, derogatory, where the show is unable to take itself seriously despite its subject matter being suffocatingly bleak. And this might work if the story was written for this, but it's still following the same general plot of Part 2, just in a far messier and far more implausible fashion. This is especially frustrating when it comes to her relationship with other characters as well, especially Jesse. You see, Jesse's introduction in the show is very different to that of the game, and as such, these characters' relationship with each other is almost unrecognizable. Jesse aspires to be a leader in Jackson, putting the needs of his people first, with a strong moral foundation. He's pragmatic, he's reasonable, and as such, to have him show up in Seattle in episode 5 is all the more jarring. Like, he literally just shows up in the middle of fucking nowhere, saving Ellie and Dina from a group of infected, and when asked how he even managed to find them, he responds by saying, "Do I look like I want to fucking talk to you right now?" before Ellie proceeds to rip into him for saving them? It's such an unfair and unbelievable reaction to have in that circumstance. I'm genuinely confused as to what the writers think they're conveying here. You're supposed to be on the same journey as Ellie, yet her truly strange reactions to seemingly positive situations make her incredibly unsympathetic, but only when it comes to how she treats those that are close to her. This comes to a head in the final episode, where she and Jesse are arguing about going after Abby or saving Tommy. It's easy to forget that in the game, their goal was to head to the aquarium and wait for Tommy to find his own way there. So when Jesse suggests that they should travel to a sniper supposedly pinned down by the WLF, there's a reasonable level of skepticism on Ellie's part. She's right in saying this might not even be Tommy, and the two understand that. Regardless of what you agree with in this circumstance, you can at least grapple with each side, and while they're clearly frustrated with each other, they're not actively hostile. It's a nuanced position that leads everyone to the same place in the end. This plays out completely differently in the show, where the pair are headed to a specific and predefined rendezvous point that Tommy is also aware of, which importantly is not the aquarium. So when they find out that Tommy is pinned down by the WLF, Ellie sees the Ferris wheel in the distance and decides that it's appropriate to abandon Tommy to go after Abby instead. Jesse incredibly reasonably protests, leading to this absolutely fucking bizarre moral grandstanding on Ellie's behalf, denouncing Jesse's pragmatism and philanthropy because it doesn't extend to Seattle's warring factions, and denouncing Jackson as well, the place where both of them have lived relatively peaceful lives for half a decade. As ridiculous and unbelievable as this interaction is, what was even crazier is what happens when they get back to the theater and discuss it. Ellie questions Jesse on why he came back for her when he clearly could have found Tommy and headed back to the theater without her, and what he says, man, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's pulled straight out of a teen drama. If I was out there somewhere, lost and in trouble, you'd set the world on fire to save me. Motherfucker, she just straight up abandoned Tommy to go and accidentally kill 2 people in the aquarium. And the worst part is that she has the audacity to look him in the face and say in this smug way, yeah, I would. What the fuck? What the characters are saying doesn't at all match the events that transpired. I don't know how this slipped through the cracks, but with all the other inconsistencies, I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. What I find really funny is that some people criticize the game for having unbelievable character motivations and decision making, yet in Mazen's attempt to remedy this, they've made the issue so much more egregious, and this fundamental problem permeates the entire season. It doesn't help that a central pillar of the game, something so essential to the plot, is completely absent here, and that is Ellie's descent. Ellie kills a grand total of, let me think, like 3 or 4 people here, and it doesn't seem to help that 2 of them were completely accidental. She fights one WLF grunt in the station, she leaves Nora to die, and then accidentally shoots both Owen and Mel, which she is incredibly distraught by, running entirely counter to the thematic underpinnings of what the story is trying to present. And this whole C-section thing, it's so unnecessary and adds literally nothing. The game at least respected you enough as a player to understand why Ellie killing a pregnant woman was wrong and thematically appropriate to the game's narrative. You don't have any trouble understanding the state of emotional distress this puts her in because it's obvious. You don't have to be told explicitly. The show takes this obvious fact and waves it in your face like you are an idiot, furthering the idea that Ellie's motivations are entirely unrealistic. In almost every situation, when presented with a choice, Ellie tries to do the right thing. She tries to save Mel's kid. She tries to save random children in the street. And I have to stress this kind of person would not be in this situation. It doesn't make sense for her to follow Abby halfway across the country and also be the second coming of Jesus Christ level good, always interested in doing what's right. This is a far cry from the complexity and nuance that was ever present in the original, and it's a damn shame in my mind. To be honest, it feels like baby's first The Last of Us Part 2, and I mean that in the worst way possible. Season 1 saw Bella Ramsey's performance as Ellie garner praise for their authenticity to the original character, yet after this season's 5-year time skip, it's clear their performance was unable to even grapple with the character's growth, and this is made especially problematic by what a few people have described as Season 2's best episode, The Price. The Price acts as what many would consider one of the most important parts of The Last of Us Part 2. Flashbacks detailing the eventual rift that would form between Ellie and Joel, made all the more poignant by its stunning character work and some of the most emotionally resonant scenes in the whole game. The flashbacks, especially the museum, really well and truly understood exactly what people loved about the relationship between these two characters, so much so that even people that were highly critical of Part 2 and its story loved this sequence. It wasn't just thematically consistent through to the first game, exemplifying the length that Joel would go to for Ellie to just experience a fraction of her lost childhood. It also truly grappled with what that loss meant, an intelligent, introspective teenager that perhaps could have done great things if her circumstances were different. But of course, they aren't. It's a beautiful section about love, about growth, about the value of family, and its emotional resonance can't be overstated. For such an emotionally charged sequence to be replaced by a dry and soulless corporate approximation, devoid of any and all of the magic that made this section so special in the first place, what many have said is the best part of Season 2, might be my biggest disappointment. It's clear in the game that Ellie is quite smart. She spends a lot of her free time reading, is interested in space, in comics, typical teenager stuff, all the more important considering the world that she's grown up in. I'm being serious when I say this. I'm not even sure that Ellie from the show can read, as it's consistently pointed out by both Joel and Dina that she isn't exactly bright. The game makes a joke in the museum, with Ellie mispronouncing the name of Yuri Gagarin, an incredibly reasonable thing to do, by the way, showing her exposure to literature, her interest in science, but also fully understanding that she's grown up in the middle of a fucking apocalypse. Because HBO's Ellie is literally an idiot, they attempt to make a similar joke, but in asking what Joel has gotten her for her birthday, she asks, "Is it a ladder of kittens?" As I've said, similar events take place here, but this is not the Ellie that you know. That much is clear. She doesn't show any interest in science or history, despite a throwaway line in one of the earlier episodes to try and justify why this flashback could take place. The museum was an incredibly intentional choice on behalf of Joel in the game, taking into account Ellie's interests, her forward-facing outlook, and working hard as hell to treat her to something truly special for her birthday. That's important because it represents a piece of her, detailed over the entire first game. This aligns with exactly the kind of person that Ellie would have wanted to have been had the world not fallen apart. His choice in finding a place so out of reach shows just how much he cares about her, and that is essential to both of the characters. In the show, Ellie is just some dumb kid, and Joel is only at the museum because she's a kid, and kids supposedly like museums. It's such a gross oversimplification of such a compelling beat in the narrative. This continues outwards to the rest of the episode, where it decides to fundamentally change the structure of the whole story in a way that not only barely scrapes together any semblance of continuity as it is, but completely ruins the most powerful moment of the game due to, again, a grand effort to moralize to the audience in a way that feels so unbelievable that I'm not sure how this made it into the final script. Practically the most important piece of writing that the whole plot of the game hinges on is why Ellie is so driven to go after Abby in the first place. Why, despite setback after setback that would lead any reasonable person to just turn around and go home, something suggested to her many times, she still pushes forward on some seemingly senseless revenge quest. This motivation is not fully explored until literally the final scene of the whole game, and that ambiguity is a central driving force for the plot. We see Ellie and Joel whilst still friendly, grow slowly apart as Ellie gets older, not just because she's a teenager, but because she knows deep down that something in Joel's explanation of what happened at the hospital just doesn't add up. We see them bicker about it on patrol, but the real inciting moment comes when Ellie decides to return to Salt Lake City in search of answers. Joel chases after her, where she presses him for the truth. This scene is soul-destroying, as it implies that at the time of Joel's death, he and Ellie had been no contact for 2 full years, which would lead you to further question just why Ellie would go to the lengths that she would, knowing full well what he did to the Fireflies, dooming the world for the one that he loved. He robbed Ellie of her purpose, but in a way that was so human, so real, you couldn't help but understand. So this period of time in which Ellie and Joel haven't spoken is crucial when it comes to understanding both their relationship and why it seems that Ellie would go to the ends of the earth for justice. And that is explained on a quiet winter's night on the porch. It's here that we learn of an event that well and truly pushes The Last of Us Part 2 into the realm of tragedy. And this is that Joel and Ellie did manage to reconcile on the night before he was taken from her. In a conversation that's emotional weight is seared into my very soul. I remember exactly how I felt the first time I experienced this. Like, I cried so much. It's just one of the most heart-wrenching, emotional sequences I think I've ever experienced in a piece of media in my whole life, and it relies on the context of everything that came before it. It's revealed that Joel's death at the hand of the girl with the braid was not Ellie's one true motivator. It's that the time she wasted shutting Joel out for 2 whole years prior, before having a chance at a life with him ripped away from her. It's not about Abby. It's about her own guilt, this frustration within her for distancing herself from him. What Abby took from her was not just Joel, but the opportunity for reconciliation that she'd just come to realize. This tore me to pieces. This is written almost perfectly, in my opinion. I remember exactly how it made me feel. So when the show twists and contorts the most pivotal scene in the story, turning this incredibly powerful and resonant moment into nothing more than an act of abuse at the hands of a weak man. I not only felt none of the emotional weight due to its shoddy writing, but it actively made me angry at what the showrunners took from such an important moment. It is such a gross bastardization of the meaning of this scene, especially given the narrative structural changes. Ellie and Joel never had this massive rift form between them in the show. They existed almost as a happy family despite some typical teenage drama before the show decides to insert this entirely inconsequential plot about Joel killing his therapist's infected husband and lying about it. Yes, there was a period of time in which the two didn't talk because of the incident. I believe it was 9 months or something from memory. But when they get to talking on the porch, the show decides to attempt some insane Frankensteining together of events from the game, mashing the point where Joel admits that he killed the Fireflies and Ellie's attempt at forgiveness into the space of literally 2 minutes. This is just absolutely unbelievable, suggesting that Joel could deliver the most perspective-shattering, life-altering information that he doomed the world to save her life, something that incredibly reasonably would lead to someone cutting someone out of their life for years, and diminishing that into, "I would like to try and forgive you," literally in the same short conversation. It's fucking absurd that anyone would behave like this, and also completely voids this interaction of the incredibly important nuance of why Ellie would choose to cut Joel out of her life in the first place. This doesn't even account for this incredibly unnecessary addition that the series made, showing that Joel and Tommy were beaten by their father pre-outbreak, recontextualizing Joel's choice to take Ellie out of the hospital as an act of child abuse and not an incredibly human reaction to the possibility of his surrogate daughter being killed by doctors without her having a say. It's not just unnecessary, it actively harms the story, placing an impossible moral equivalence between a choice that's so nuanced that its implication has been debated for over a decade and beating children. It's honestly disgusting in a way that I never thought I'd be saying. There are so many more words in this interaction, yet so much less is said. The way that this plays out is just inferior to the performances from Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson in the original, turning an interaction that nobody would have any difficulty understanding into an over-explained, overacted, whiny mess. And for the showrunners to place this pivotal moment so early on in the story, it's just an embarrassing misunderstanding of a point in time so fundamental and powerful to these characters. It could literally be argued as the inciting incident for everything that follows. To have that reduced to a bullshit, emotionless mess is the biggest sin that HBO's The Last of Us Season 2 commits. If you've watched Season 2, I'm sure you know that I'm only scratching the surface of these deep-rooted problems. Every sequence, every interaction, the way the WLF and the Seraphites are presented, to the plethora of incredibly distracting changes that serve no purpose other than to say that they're different from the game. This can be picked apart endlessly, but I don't want to get too into the weeds here. It's easy to nitpick, pointing at Ellie's shoes or silica gel in the guitar case, but I think these problems are so fundamental to how the show has decided to adapt its story that it can't be ignored. If you're like me and loved what The Last of Us Part 2 reached for in its writing, I'm sure it's difficult to not be disappointed by the ham-fisted over-explaining of everything. Characters basically look at the camera and tell you exactly what they think and how they feel, or the fact that the show is unable to even follow the rules that it set for itself, having to reintroduce spores in an episode that fully leans on contrivance. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that it's a plot hole that Ellie can breathe these spores and not get infected, as the infection pathway is shown to be completely different than what was suggested in Season 1. With the exception of Isabella Merced's Dina, every major character is absolutely butchered, fundamentally altering their personalities and motivations in ways that not only make them entirely unrecognizable from their original counterparts, but force them to behave in ways that not only make the events of the story unbelievable, but the characters' actions themselves. It's in these changes that I find myself incredibly disappointed, not just with the changes made to the characters and a story that I love, but also in the commodification of what I view as such an important piece of video game history. And that's why HBO doesn't understand The Last of Us Part 2.